Hello spice trading enthusiasts, my name is AlzaboHD. Europa Universalis V is shipping next Tuesday, and Paradox Interactive have sponsored me to wage war against the sea and transform Holland into the formidable known as the Netherlands. Holland has high verticality and a profitable economy, and in today's video we will take this two-county country to the heights of prosperity, starting as Captain Jean-Luc Picard and the Dutch Federation. Thanks to early game access, we've already played about 40 hours in game and have an insane campaign for you here today, and you can support me by buying EU5 with the link below, which will give you a Steam key and give me extra ducats at no cost to you. Without further ado, it's time to crash the tulip economy in 1337 AD and wage war against the water. We'll begin our save by selecting the tutorial, and this is because you can get an extra 100 ducats versus a normal campaign, and since this is our first game, we'll take any help we can get. Fortunately, a pastry known as lemon cake taught me optimal opening strategies, and our first step will be to use our tutorial money to build a road from our capital to Amsterdam. Holland begins the 14th century with a fiefdom subject state in Zealand, which we'll start integrating diplomatically before unpausing our game. Our first diplomats will be sent to Central Europe to find allies, and will improve relations with Austria and Bohemia, cram our cabinet with competent ministers, and use them to boost legitimacy and stability. Next, we'll assign our leader, Captain Jean-Luc Picard, as naval commander, as this will boost crown power in our country and give us a modifier that will directly increase our profit potential. We're over the fort limit, which is costing us money, so we'll tear down the fort of Amsterdam, balance our budget with enough minting to not give us inflation, and change our employment system to most profitable for progress towards a capital economy. In the starting age of traditions, our technology is terrible, and we'll focus on guilds and institution growth first, automate trade and production for now as these require a PhD, and we'll swap out our awful feudal nobility reform for agricultural cultivation. Estates are incredibly powerful in EU5, but need to be managed carefully to avoid the gift of the guillotine. So, instead of spending an hour comparing them, I'll just say we'll Dutch touch urban development grants for development growth in all of our counties. This is really OP. Common militia for more levies, which form our early game armies, and primacy of the nobility for plus 5% army discipline. With our estates bribed and happy, our polity is already turning a profit, and we'll unpause the game. In addition to improving relations, we can have our diplomats curry favors in Austria and Bohemia for gold, settlers, and alliance interactions later on, and with the basics out of the way, it's time to talk about our economy. RGOs, or resource gathering operations, are more profitable than buildings in the 1300s, and within our Bruges market, dyes sell the highest, so we'll focus them first for buckets of ducats. Zealand's diplomatic annexation grants 30,000 citizens and the town of Middelburg, but for future expansion we'll need claims and CBs, which are best produced calling parliament every 5 years. Our first parliament is in February of 1340, and will promote urbanization and pass a concession to push us above 50% support. Claims, changing laws, and all legislative interactions require 50% support each, and our first priority is to change our distribution of power laws from traditional distribution to favoring the ruler, which is the strongest modifier if you want money, soldiers, or really anything. Within a few years of starting your campaign, the plague will end up killing about half of your initial population, but that affects everyone in the world, so relax and enjoy the rats. Our parliament will continue granting concessions until we have another 50% support, and unlike in EU4, we can use the diet to fabricate casus bellis, which is the easiest and fastest way to get claims. This wouldn't be Holland without insulting our neighbors, and with a fresh CB, we can declare war on Utrecht as early as 1340, and Captain Picard gave the order to engage. We have more levies, aka armed peasantry, and with our count leading his men personally, routed the enemy with ease. Glory awaited Guillaume. We'll use our favors in Bohemia to invite settlers to Holland to replace those lost to the plague, and the rest of our war was easy, resulting in a peace that granted us our first vassal we can absorb in 10 years. The historical event known as the Low Franconian Frisian War gives Holland a free insult CB on Frisia, and due to our diplomats' diligence, we can draft a defensive pact with Austria as our polity enters the Renaissance era. With our starting strategy out of the way, it's high time to put more land in Holland. So, we'll use the insult CB to declare war on Frisia, use our 2-boat navy to blockade their capital, and battle within the swamps of our subject state. Unfortunately, raising a peasant army negatively affects our economy, as our voluntary workforce are now hunting humans, and with Frisia's capital captured, we could send our forces to focus on their friends. These pathetic polities would pay reparations to jumpstart our economy, and Frisia would become our second vassal in a war that only lasted 2 years. But Willie I had fallen, and it was time for Duke Willie II, who maintained our PU with Hanut, as our leaders were the same person. For the early game, we will build roads to increase provincial control and profit, host our second parliament to get a CB in order to unite our country contiguously, and even though we're outnumbered, Holland has more discipline than a woman, and her orbiters of one province polities. These enemy lands divided our domain, but with plus 5% discipline, our army was Zwol, and in less than half a year, captured the counties needed to vassalize our third subject state. Our peasants are insanely powerful and burninated the countryside, leaving no woman, child, or man alive. Look at that KD ratio. Our army lost only 9 men compared to 342 of the enemy. So, we'll take our fourth vassal, redistribute the wealth, and take our fifth subject and first fiefdom in the form of human horn. The primary enemy of this war fell in 1346, and with 5 vassals and 1 fiefdom, Holland had upset the HRE. But our Dutch diplomats can save this situation by going door to door and selling our peaceful intentions. Bubonic plague had spread across Europe, and half of the humans in Holland had died, leaving an empty parliament to abolish censorship. That said, our plague party came to an end in 1351, when the largest nation on Earth declared war for our capital, and unless we want to become Belgian, we'd have to fight for our freedom. We're outnumbered 9-1 before the war's even begun, and the first rule of EU5 is don't fight France, but if you're forced to do so in the early game, try and concede for peace as swiftly as possible. In this case, we only survived by releasing Loon and Horn in humiliation, but at least we're still a sovereign nation, which is more than Utrecht could say as they soon faced diplomatic integration. We have way too many vassals and not enough land of our own, so we'll strategically move our capital county from Den Haag to Amsterdam, promote urbanization and grant concessions so that we can move from a feudal administration to a centralized council, and embrace a traditional economy to finally get a free town in the county of Hoorn. Our second government reform will grant Holland crown power, the best modifier in the game. The plague was over and only killed 54,000 people, and we'll use favors to force Bohemia to repopulate our territory with Slavic settlers. By 1360, Utrecht had finally integrated into our nation, and our cores doubled our size and population, and Herters and Kirche were soon to follow. Welcome to Holland, a place that welcomed even Belgians amongst our ranks, and speaking of which, our next parliament voted to claim their capital. This war would be risky, but Brabant's allies were far away in Italy, and with the guilds of Helders in our ranks, this should be easy in theory. In December of 1365, our forces defended Dordrecht. Dordrecht. Oh my god. And decimated the Brabantese, and chained this victory with the breaking of Breda and siege of Brussels. We have an serious problem, and that's because the Pope's private army will give me unclap. So we'll take what we can, which in this case are the provinces of Antwerp and Kempenland. We played less than 30 years, and already we can form my favorite coffee shop country, and thus in 1366 AD, Count Guillaume took Holland to new heights and elevated the lowlands into the Netherlands. Orange is not just the color of nacho cheese, but also the varnish of victory, and Guillaume's 4-month party was to die for, quite literally, leaving the polity without their Hainutian personal union and in a state of regency. Our new flag confused the neighborhood, and the coalition was no more, and our regent died, which meant that we were in our girl boss era. The States General decreed an end to Loon's autonomy, and after yoinking money from Catalonia, declared war in 1370. This conflict was easy peasy, lemon squeezy, and yielded Zeitfen as a vassal, fiat currency to pay off our debts, and the involuntary commitment of the lunatic lands as our southernmost subject state. Even libraries and books were unable to educate our incoming heir, and despite his status as both the Duke of Hainaut and the Count of our nation, was in a bugged situation, as there was no personal union. Even attempting to reclaim the PU was impossible, as our CB did not count for a CB, and our enemy was also me. So, upon the advice of the Council of the BBs, we broke the laws of reality, and Ned 1 and Ned 2 were at last dead. Heart failure, huh? Well, at least we've got a Dutch-cultured regent, and he's got a ridiculously cool name, and a drippy cap. Our new subject nations have transferred their knowledge of military institutions, which we will embrace. The Pope has canonized our original ruler as a saint, and Dr. Eggman, the Emperor of the HRE, granted our county the rights to become a proper duchy. We'll ally Austria, and in order to take Brabant without resistance, we'll use an old EU4 trick and fabricate a claim on their weakest ally, transforming what would have been a challenging war into a casual conflict with tea and crumpets. Normally, Brabant has like 40 allies, but their weakest link is only friends with Alsace and themselves. So we'll sweep the floor, secure the payload, and subjugate the second strongest Dutch state. These loyal dogs will do well to follow Frisia's lead in submitting to diplomatic integration, and the Netherlands were now the Megalands. Denmark is a natural ally, and England is, well, only time will tell. But another Parliament CB meant war never changes, and in 1380, our latest war with the HRE yielded victory, the coronation of our regent, and the vassalization of Valkenburg, Jülich, and with some patience the subjugation of Liège, Cleves, and finally Heisenberg. To truly start cooking, we will need a mustard CB, the integration of mental lunacy, and yet another war that was over before it began. Fortunately for our polity, Cologne controlled a market which yearned for tulips and new management, and so in 1387 it was ceded from Germany to Hoorn, and wow, this upset the Belgians. Münster was now orange, and we had a subject swarm of smaller German states. But a year later, England forced us into a war against the most powerful polity, and it was time for trouble. In many ways, an alliance with England in EU5 is the exact opposite of a friendship with benefits, unless if you consider watering your garden with Belgian blood or being on the receiving end of a French death stack to be a benefit worth having. Hordes of moldy cheese-eating enemies flooded into our already flooded fiefdom, and Dordrecht drowned, though our resistance managed to take back the town. Congratulations, Brabant, you are now a part of the Netherlands, and will now be invaded. Our heir and his hair are simply idiotic, and Utrecht now spoke Francais. The French foe had won the day, and if it were not for Frisian freedom fighters liberating Amsterdam, we would all be smoking cigarettes and eating baguettes. White peace was the best possible outcome, but our ruler died without elaboration, leaving the nation in the hands of his simple son, who agreed to share power with the other idiot heir with the silly hair. Diplomatic integration meant that we were now Master Cleef, and our parliament's goal of increasing relations with our neighbors meant that we'd do the opposite, and enrage Germany by fabricating a claim over Cologne. Generous merchants funneled money for this war effort, though our so-called ally who kept calling us into unwinnable wars refused to pay a single shilling. It's New Year's Day, and what better way to celebrate than making Deutschland Dutch again, and so in 1397, war was waged against Cologne and half of the HRE. For the sake of brevity, and the fact that the deadline to release this video is coming faster than a Frisian buying french fries, it's time for a montage to cover the next 40 years, aka Voltaire's nightmare. Victory in Germany vassalized Hainaut, Oldenburg, Regularberg, Deutschmark, and most importantly Cologne, which brought banking as an institution. Dutch and Deutsch now number an over 1 million national population. Orange is the new black, and success breeds jealousy, or in this case, a coalition of 81 province miners. At the turn of the 15th century, the Horn market moved to Amsterdam. Heinsberg's diplomatic annexation resulted in the Renaissance within our realm, exploration began to uncover future vacation destinations, and favors Austria owed us led to money that was invested in developing our domestic economy. Mustard Land joined our hand in union. The coalition dissolved due to our door-to-door diplomacy, another war meant nothing would be the same, and Dortmund, Tecklenburg, and Arnsberg arrived just in time for the 6th phase of the 100 Years' War, which we tried to avoid, but England dragged us into it against our will. It only took 2 years and our utter humiliation for peace with France. Our peasants tried to overthrow the state and failed, but they did fell our leader, who was replaced by an incompetent idiot. Big Blue destroyed the roast beefs just in time for us to bankrupt their nation via financial compensation. Parliament granted a CB on Iceland, and with the support of our Danish allies, resulted in Norway granting Greenland and Iceland independence, and the colonization of our first territory in the North Atlantic periphery. Parliament every 5 years means a new CB, and war was waged for Lunsburg, though these Germans had hands, and we were only able to subjugate Onnesbruck and Brema as vassal nations before a second humiliation. Thankfully, our drunk duke drowned in a canal, the Amsterdam market beat back Bruges, and with France occupied in a war with Austria, Bohemia, and half of Europe, it was an ideal time to fabricate a claim on Belgium and launch a war against the strongest state on Earth. This is our 4th time fighting France, but this time, war is on our terms, our English ally is on our side, and the baguette is busy in a two-front war. The Flemish foe and their flimsy forces stood no chance against our deluxe Dutchmen, and their multiple attempts at taking Mons were repelled. Les Bleus also lost against our outnumbered army, but we faced defeat in Dunkirk, and the advent of the Age of Exploration was met with blood in Flanders Field. Bruges was the highest priority in this war, and by 1437 was captured, while the French fled from the breweries and beers of Chimay. As long as we hold the Flemish forts, our war score will tick upward. Liège longed for the lowlands, and the Blue Blob tried and failed to reclaim Lille. Bienvenue chez les Ch'tis. The seasons were changing, and snow covered the bodies in Belgium, and 2 years of occupying the Diet Dutch Duchy had turned the war in our favor. Some of you may die, but that's a price I'm willing to pay, and Trier wanted off Mr. Bones' wild ride with a white piece. In 1439, Cologne found their home in our nation, and the printing press institution appeared in Antwerp, thus granting us medieval mass media. Merry Christmas to our ruler, who died, granting us the gift of a god-tier regent who set out to balance the budget in Parliament, which allowed massive minting without inflation. Over 4 years had passed since we opted to free Flanders, and 68,000 of our troops were converted into sunflowers, while France and friends lost 72,000 soldiers. I've done the math enough to know that the price of a mile was thus calculated to be 857 souls, and thus the cursed wasteland of Belgium had joined hands with our Netherlands. Peace had restored the territorial integrity of the HRE, and it's time to welcome the 300,000 Belgians that survived into our state. By the mid-15th century, the Netherlands are the undisputed economic, naval, and military power of the lowlands and northern Germany, and our regent with god-tier stats was thus crowned as duke and forcibly transformed into a howdah-eating bicycle enthusiast. The diplomatic double annexation of Arnsberg and Onnesbruck followed 2 months later, with Dortmund rounding out the last of our vassal integrations in September. You should never trust Denmark or the Danes, and before ending our campaign, they called us into a war using favors. And to keep things cheeky, we will end today's video on November 11th, 1444, the exact starting date of EU4. Thanks to our extra 107 years of casual expansion, we are approximately 10 times larger than EU4 base game Holland. Naturally, we'll mark the occasion by destroying Belgium and liquidating the Bruges market, an act so holy the Pope canonized the third Dutch saint. If you like data and numbers, which, let's be honest, you're playing EU5, we will now cover an overview of the Netherlands and the world. Our state stretches from Reykjavik to the Rhine River, possesses social values that prioritize innovation, centralization, and capitalism, and has a population of 2.4 million people, placing it above England and in the top 10 of most populated polities. Our capital in Amsterdam has 57,000 people, and is ruled by one of the most skilled statesmen I've ever seen in my 40 hours of playtime. Following the destruction of Belgium, the Amsterdam market is one of the richest in the world and is larger than that of London, specializing in the production of fiber, wool, and salt, but unfortunately lacks books and thus knowledge. Fortunately, we do have the most amount of artwork in the world, which is logical, as our Dutch duchy is 50% Low Franconian, aka the Proto-Dutch touch. The state itself exerts power primarily along the coast, as our gravel roads do not yet grant enough capital proximity, but the world of EU5 is larger than the height of our verticality, so let's cover the areas further abroad. North and South America are relatively empty, as Columbus is -6 years old. I'm not fat, but Somalia is, and they are by far the largest African state. In Europe, the Golden Horde is humongous. Asia boasts a Turbo Tibet, and the Yuan dynasty is not having a good time. The Korean kingdom of Goryeo, though, is having a good time. Majapahit has accumulated mass, and there's always Yuwu. If you want to see the Netherlands enter the era of exploration for a continued campaign, you can like the video and subscribe to my channel to support me for free. If you plan on buying EU5, you can support me by buying your Steam key with the link below and on screen, and I thank you for your support. This video was sponsored by Paradox Interactive, and if you'd like to support me even further, please consider becoming a channel member or a patron for bonuses like early access to future videos and your name in the credits, population Yuwu.